The first step in the process of getting ready to embroider is transferring your pattern onto your fabric. This particular pattern comes in 3 different pieces. Your pattern will be marked with fold lines that you will create creases in the pages so that you can get all the designs of the patterns to line up. Once you have all your lines lined up, you're going to want to hold the pages together. I'm just using washi tape here so that I can remove it later and store my pattern pieces. But if you're only going to transfer at one time, any kind of tape, clear tape, would be fantastic for this. Once you have your pattern ready to go, you're going to take your piece of fabric. Because we're using a 12-inch hoop, you're going to want a piece of fabric that is big enough to fit in your hoop and give you enough room on the edges to tighten your fabric inside the hoop so that your stitches can lay nice and flat. So in this case, you'll want anywhere from probably a 15 to 18-inch piece of fabric. You're going to want to generally center it over your pattern. Doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but you want to get it to lay as flat on your pattern as you can. And then you're going to pin it in place so that you can transfer it over to your light source. You want to make sure where you're pinning is away from the pattern so that you have access to all of the different lines and pieces of your pattern. So I'm just pinning it up on the edges. And again, you kind of want to smooth out your fabric as you go to make sure that it's laying nice and flat against your pattern pieces. Once you have it pinned in place, you're going to take it over to your light source. In this case, I'm using a light pad. When you turn on the light source, you can see that your pattern shows up through the light behind the fabric. If you're doing this on a window, my recommendation is to tape your pattern first to the window and then bring your fabric over, and you're going to want to tape just the top portion of your fabric to the window so that you can hinge it and make sure that as you're transferring it, you can check it once in a while to make sure you're transferring everything. So we're going to talk for a minute about what you're going to use to transfer your pattern. There's quite a few options out there. These are some of my favorite. I really like a water-soluble marking pen because the lines can disappear. Once you're done with your project and you finished all of your stitches, you can take your pattern out of the hoop, take it to a sink, get it nice and wet, and the marking lines will completely disappear. I would strongly recommend that method if you're not super confident in your stitching, as that way you can get rid of your lines if they're not where you want them to be. But I actually almost always use just a mechanical pencil and an eraser to get rid of marks if I hit a stray mark on my fabric sometimes. I love that the lines are nice and thin. The pencil marks are dark enough that I can see them, but light enough that if I happen to miss the edge of the stitch a little bit, or a little bit happens to show through my stitches a hair, it's not really noticeable, especially on a fabric like this, where the natural feel of the linen is going to disguise any stray pencil marks. There are also products out there that are water-soluble, printable transfer sheets that you can run straight through your printer. Those are nice because you don't have to spend all of the time transferring the pattern, but they tend to gum up your needle the more you stitch, and the size of this pattern, I feel like by the time you get to the end, you would be fighting that stickiness. Also, because your pattern pieces are overlapping, you'd be trying to stitch through multiple layers of that. I just think this is probably going to be your best bet, transferring it with a pencil or a water-soluble pen. So once you've decided what you're going to use to transfer it, you're going to come over to your light board and you're going to use one hand to hold your fabric against the pattern. And especially when I'm using a mechanical pencil, I like to do nice short strokes so that I'm not pulling my fabric. You'll see if I push too hard, my fabric kind of bunches and my pattern gets distorted a little bit. So I work in small sections and I will slowly just mark my lines. Sometimes as you're going, it's hard to tell if you've actually marked the line or not. So once in a while, I will come back to my light switch, turn it off, and make sure that I'm seeing all of my lines coming through and that the pattern is making sense as a whole. So you'll go through, make sure that all of your markings are transferred, and then it's time to move on to needle and thread.